Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not Too Comic Book. This being a show where we talk about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about Invincible, Season 3, Episode 4. Another great episode. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Let's start off with the opening of the episode. Obviously, we have Shrinking Ray and Rex shopping, and it's just kind of like a normal day situation. And it's interesting because obviously Rex is kind of making jokes and stuff about that, because like Ray is like, wait, if you guys never cooked, how did you guys make it as team? It's like, well, Kate apparently just kept to herself, did her own thing. Robot, and Eve still lived at home, so it was never kind of an issue. Him, on the other hand, Rex stole Robot's credit card and was like, oh, I survived off of ramen and pizza. Well, like, my man, those are like my two favorite foods. I could eat them like endlessly, day back to back with no issue, because those are like my two like go-to foods. But either way, I'm sure that's every like, I'm sure it's also like teenager / college student. I'm sure that's their go, especially the ramen noodles. But like, yeah, pizza too. I'm sure like that's all like college level student, like, you know, aged people's like go-to meals and stuff. So kind of made do. Ray talks about the fact this, I thought was interesting when she brings up like her very strict dietary restrictions. She thought was interesting. She even says like how effed up it is, like, oh, you know, how much her parents watched her weight despite her being a person that has the power to shrink. Obviously immediately made me think of Emma from Gen V. It might not be under the same circumstances why they did that. Like, I don't know if they had the same view as like Emma with her mom, like her like worried about Emma's weight and also her height. Oh, you might want to eat a little bit more food so you're a little taller. Like, oh, you're a couple centimeters shorter. You need to eat some more food, type of thing. I don't know if they were coming at it from that perspective, because they haven't really gone to the like in depth on Ray's powers. Like, it makes you almost kind of wonder, are they very similar to Emma's? If you haven't seen Gen V, Emma's powers basically is like she grows by purging, by throwing up, and she grows big by indulging. So I'm wondering if Ray's powers are the same, which is kind of really sad and effed up. And once again, her and Rex. Once again, I also keep pointing out too, they are putting those characters together more and more. Once again, we're also talking about two people who went through something traumatic together. You almost died. To be fair, Monster Girl, you know, Amanda went through the similar thing in season 1 when her and Samson and Invincible all kind of got their shit pushed in with the whole Machine Head and Battle Beast situation. You know, poignant to bring up Battle Beast, but we'll talk about that later. So, but it's a very different situation, and they were kind of, once again, similar, but it's just like, it kind of bonds you. And I thought it was interesting because Ray's like, it was like Rex being like, oh, we don't have to do this. And Ray kind of snapped at him and being like, Joe, if you don't want to be here, you don't have to do it. I'll do this. You just do something else. And Rex tried to apologize by like going like, well, I'll handle all the cheese and maybe the milk and stuff like that. She's like, all the dairy stuff. He's like, whatever you want to call it. And I was like, right, Rex is an asshole, but he's trying to be nice because I think he recognizes how much of an issue it is for Ray. So, and immediately it's like, right, she only came back in episode 1. And once again, it's been 3 months since, and even probably longer, because that was like probably like episode 4, maybe 5 or something like that, when the Ray and Rex almost dying situation happened. So it's been even longer, and she's only just getting back. So it's still kind of like, you know, even episode 2, she was still kind of like, it was, the trauma and pain was still there. So it is a situation of like, that's enough to kind of put a little PTSD in you, that she just wanted kind of something away from the superhero stuff, because she never had a normal upbringing. The whole superhero thing kind of has you a little more freaked after everything that's going down. She still does her job, sure, but there's still that stuff of just, I need time away from it. Like, I don't think she's ever been able just to be herself. She's always shrinking Ray, never got to really be just Ray. So I guess that's going to be something she kind of discovers, and maybe that's something like her and Rex can bond over, and where they kind of hit off with, once again, fucked up childhoods and everything, and, you know, fucked up situations that they've come through and survived. But when it's all said and done, though, they get interrupted because they have to save the day. And when they get back, Rex even talks to the rest of the group. He's like, are we like weird. He's like, is it like, do you think we should try to be more normal? And we just kind of brush past that conversation. But I guess that's going to be part of Rex and Ray's art, because he recognized like we need some more normalcy. Like it's just like, hey, they accepted everything as it is because we all have weird, complicated circumstances, but none of us have ever really taken time to try and be normal. So, and I think that's really catching up to them. I mean, once again, even look at Mark. Mark's kind of pushed, and I brought it up, I think, last episode. Like, what is normal for Mark? Sure, he's kind of himself all the time now, but he's also just invincible all the time too. Because it's like, what are you doing as Mark Grayson? It's like, well, you have your friendships as Mark Grayson's, but they're also tied to people who know you as invincible too. So like, what are you doing as Mark Grayson versus stuff you're doing as invincible? Because at least last season's like, right, you're going to college trying to have a normal life, and it's like, so Mark Grayson's kind of fallen to the wayside, and you're kind of more invincible now than you are. You know, and I think a lot of heroes kind of go through that time. And once again, we're just kind of getting the opposite end of that with like Ray and Rex, but more so Ray. So I'm just curious to see where that story arc goes. But either way, Mark is talking to Rudy, which I love that he's doing that thing where he's switching back and forth between talking as Rudy and talking as Robot. And Amanda's like, stop doing that. That's weird. And he does it again. And then at one point, both Robot and Rudy say it at the same time, sorry about that. But he's having him examine the ball that was spying on his family. So it's like, right, this whoever it is knows all this stuff about you. Whoever it is well funded, so you have to be wary of them. But other than that, Rudy/Robot can't tell him much more about who's responsible, because they scrubbed everything they could from it to make it so it was untraceable. And obviously Mark hearing like, oh, it has to be someone well organized. And even Rex was like, don't tell me you're going to do what I think you're going to do. And Mark does. Now, I wanted to try and give Mark credit as like, is he coming at this from a smart perspective? I'll get to that in a second. But obviously he shows up Pentagon, Rex shop. Cecil had to put him down, be like, yo, why are you here? He's like, you've been spying on my family. And Cecil makes it blunt. Yo, if I was spying on your family, you wouldn't even know about it. It's like, you wouldn't. I mean, hell, it like even it wasn't until the penultimate episode of season 1 that Nolan found out the family was getting spied. I mean, he kind of knew, but you know, it's like, right, they were literally across the street. So it's like, even if Nolan didn't even know. So, but it's like, which, you know, I love that line from Cecil later on being like, well, yeah, we are spying on them, but this wasn't us. So I got to find out who else is spying on them. Because of course he's going to keep an eye on Mark, because especially him and Mark having their fallout like they did. But it's also the element of, well, you got to keep an eye on him to see what he's up to, because like you are still invested in him regardless of you guys working together. He's someone that you might be on opposite ends now. Like this might be kind of very similar to the Radcliffe situation. That was a 3-year long play to push Cecil to kind of realize the nature of everything. Of once again, you could be good or you could be the guy who saved the world, not both, right? So he might be kind of in a similar boat where he's trying to play the long game with Mark, give Mark the space and let him do whatever he wants to, have his tantrum, be a teenager. But it's like, yeah, go ahead and do your thing, but eventually you'll come to see my side of things. Maybe he will, maybe he won't. I feel like he will. I've talked about that in episode 2. I'm like, I think him and Mark will be on the same side again eventually, but we'll have to wait to see. So, but the reason why I was saying like, oh, maybe Mark is being smart. I thought Mark, and maybe we'll find out Mark really was playing the smart move here, but Mark, I thought, busted up this whole situation, because this way, without asking Cecil for help, you're getting Cecil to investigate this for you. That's the smart play. And that way you make Cecil think like, oh, you don't realize you're using Cecil for your own means. Like I said, later on it might be revealed where Mark's like, no, I planned that. But I feel like, no, Mark is stubborn and very hot-headed enough that, yeah, it probably is just simply as what it is. He assumed it was Cecil and then busts up the function. Because my immediate thought was Cecil the moment we saw the ball last episode. I don't think I talked about that, but we found out, well, it wasn't Cecil. We as the audience know that, but I immediately thought it was Cecil, but then we got revealed at the end it wasn't. So I even love this. I said, well, that's a scary way to start your morning. Once again, Cecil tries to keep it as like in control as possible, but it's like, yeah, when Mark just busts in like that, he can just do whatever he wants to, like nothing in that facility. Yeah, you can stop him, but you can't really kill him. And last thing you want to do is kill him, because that's going to be a whole world of issues, because you're always going to have, you already have like the people who left the globe, Guardians of the Globe, like up your ass about things and bouncing. So it's like the last thing you want is people finding out you killed Mark. That's stuff you don't want. Plus you need Mark in play because he's the only Viltrumite on Earth that help you fight the incoming Viltrumite army. So there's that whole angle to it. But nevertheless, Mark bounces and he goes on his date, his second first date with Eve. And it's just kind of like, all right, let's put stuff aside. And but for her, it's like, oh, is it weird that it's not weird? And it's like, no, yeah, that is kind of interesting. It's like it should be weirder than what it is, but it kind of feels normal. And I guess it's because of just everything they've been through. Once again, it's just kind of like a, oh, finally it happened type of situation, right? I think that kind of plays into it. But before they could really continue their date, Portal to the Future opens up and we get, was it Fight Master? Was that his name? And Dropkick, who, interesting enough, I saw in the credits, it's voiced by Sholo Mededuena. I feel like I'm probably butchering Sholo's name. I feel like I never say his last name correctly. Obviously, I know he's best known for Cobra Kai, but I've never seen it. But the thing I best know him for is playing Jaime Reyes, aka Blue Beetle, in, well, the Blue Beetle movie from like 2023. I think he also voiced he voiced someone in the animated The Boys series. The Boys presents Diabolical. I know he did a voice in that as well. But anyway, just kind of interesting. I was like, oh, Sholo, that's cool. I was kind of listening to the voice being like, it sounded familiar, but it never really immediately clicked that was Sholo. But either way, the twins are back and they're like, oh my God, Invincible, we need your help. Because I don't know if they knew who he was when they first ran into him, but now they're like, no, oh my God, it's Mark Grayson. So they know what he looks like. I guess they have records and stuff like that. But they're from the future and they need help. They needed they needed the Declaration of Independence for whatever reason. Well, we actually find out later on the ink from it was supposed to be used as ammo. Turned out not to be the case. I mean, it almost feels this interesting parallel to how in that Angstrom Levy we got introduced to at the beginning of season 2, the one that's from that one of the worlds where Mark joined his dad. There was a very specific weapon they were trying to build to kill like Omni-Man and Mark, but it had no effect and everyone got their shit pushed in because of it. But nevertheless, they need to stop some basic king of the world. There's a king of Earth, and they need Mark's help to stop him. But Mark initially is like, I don't want anything to do with that. It's like, part of me was wondering, it's like, well, you guys, and once again, it's so black and white. It's like, you stole the Declaration of Independence. You should leave, because if I had my way, I'd just lock you up, no matter what your reasons are. It's like, come on, Mark. But it's also like, I'm trying to live my life. I'm not trying to have my date interrupted, because that came up with like the whole Amber of it all. But it's also like, well, to be fair, evil to understand. But I think it's also like, well, he already had some complicated stuff with the future, stuff. It's like, I mean, that's a whole can of worms, because it's like, well, you had to deal with a whole multiverse thing last season because of who you were in other universes made someone come after you. So there's that. Even though you weren't a bad person, it's like, oh, but the other versions of you out there in the multiverse that I've come across are bad. Then there's also the whole aspect of meeting Adam Eve like from the future. So it's like, probably don't want to do anything dimensional based or time traveling based. But they're like, oh, I guess you're not the hero you thought you were. And Mark's like, yeah, I guess I wasn't. And then one of them was like, wow, I really thought that was going to work. He's like, oh, you're so stupid for coming up with that. And so they just like basically snatch up Mark. So he has to change into his Invincible outfit. And I love they're like, wow, you just wear that? Have that all the time? He's like, yes, just shut up, like you're on thin ice. Where should I put my clothes? And then another Mark comes through the portal like, hey, takes the clothes and bounce. And he's like, wait, was that me? He's like, why did I look so miserable? I was like, how far into I'm assuming it can't be that far into the future. And even the twins are being like, yeah, with the time travel stuff, it's probably best not to know. It's like, I mean, knowing's half the battle, but it's also like, I mean, because when you know ahead of time, it's like, how much, I mean, knowing does change things. So you can know how, like, I probably should avoid that. But it's also like, yeah, you probably don't want to know too much about the future. So that's also the shitty situation. But basically, there was a king who basically protected the world until he lost his mind and kind of turned into a full-blown dictator, destroyed cities that wouldn't capitulate, and basically robbed a lot of the world of, like, electricity. You can only go to, like, work camps or public executions, and those public executions you can only visit if you are a family member of the person getting executed. Other than that, you have your curfews. So it's up to Mark to face this guy. He's got his own militaristic like robot arm. So the immediate thought then becomes like, okay, who is this person? And even Mark had asked the question like, is this person a Viltrumite? And they're like, we have no idea what that is. Because obviously this world's been going like this for like hundreds of years. And understandably, from Mark's perspective, it would make sense. Because I was about to say, it's like, it can't be Mark, right? Because you would think they would probably want to broach that conversation early enough to Mark. So I was like, who could it be? I was like, it didn't even cross my mind that it could be immortal. Didn't even think that it would be. But I mean, it's like, yeah, there's very few people that could be around for that long and be this dictator and stuff like that. Because there's a lot we didn't find out in this world either. We don't know what, I mean, once again, this is hundreds of years in the future. We have no idea how long it's been since Immortal took over this, like, running this planet. Because it's been a while, obviously, and that is a kind of interesting thing where it's like, in all that time, in those hundreds of years, Mark never came back, even though we know Mark would definitely still be around. So it's like, it's only been a few centuries, he would still be around. So why didn't he ever come back? Like, what happened in his world? What happened to the other heroes? Like, are all the other heroes dead? I mean, most heroes don't have the extended life expectancy that Mark does. Once again, don't even know if Oliver does. I mean, even if he has an extended life, but because of his being a Thraxan, it might be a thing of, well, because of that, he might have actually the life expectancy of a human, or maybe like half the life expectancy of a human. Who knows how that balances out? We still won't know how much the Viltrumite blood in him contributes to that. That's been a big question even since last season. So either way, Mark and the twins get captured. They face, the king and Immortal, and we find out, he brings up some interesting stuff. He's like, oh, you look thinner. Are you sick again? Did you ever not find a cure? So I'm like, oh, he got sick. It's like, can a Viltrumite get sick? Not less in this time frame, like someone found an illness that could affect the Viltrumite or something. There's so much about this future we don't know, and I guess it's kind of like, yeah, it's apocalyptic future. How we got there, it's like, well, as long as you avoid this one particular thing, you kind of avoid the catalyst of the domino effect of everything else happening. But it's like, how do we get here? Like, is there, like, does Cecil's organization not exist enough to, like, stop? I mean, Immortal was a part of all that, so he would know how to probably systematically destroy a lot of those systems and kind of reign supreme. Like I said, like, how many of those, like, how many heroes are left in this world? Are heroes a dying breed at this point in time, all these centuries later? Most of the heroes we know would be long since dead, but once again, we have no idea. Like, for one, we know it's centuries later, but once again, how long in between Mark leaving here? Because even Immortal says, like, your family was okay. Like, kind of made it sound like your family was okay, so I don't know if it's like a Eve is okay and Debbie and Oliver, even though, like, they would have normal human expectancies. I mean Debbie and Eve would be, Oliver might still be around, who knows? But it's like, any kids that Mark have would most likely still be around too. So I guess that's all he was talking about. So there's so much on that front, but the Immortal, basically, it became too much. The weight of leading this world. I even thought it was interesting because he was like, oh, I've lost so much. He's like, oh, is this about Kate? Did she die again? And he was like, who was Kate? Was she the redhead? He's like, no, that was Eve. Which is funny because I don't know if that was meant to be a callback to season 1, because when Amber and William are talking and Eve's like, I'm Adam Eve, they're like, oh yeah, I see it now. Yeah, you can duplicate yourself. She's like, I'm not duplicate. I'm the other person, Adam Eve. Okay. That is like, that's why I was almost wondering, like, if that was supposed to be like a slight callback to that, but I'm probably reading too much into it. But he didn't remember her, which I think is interesting, because in season 2, he was brokenhearted. He fell apart upon losing Kate. To be fair, she was the most recent person he lost. This is him hundreds of years where he's lost everything. Like, so many people he loved has come and gone. It's like, he's already lived a life like that. Then you stacked even more of that loneliness on top of, like, ruling this world and just kind of going more and more insane as it chips away your insanity, because that loneliness, on top, you have to be so on top of everything and protect people. It's just, yeah, it cuts away at you until it chips away until you have nothing left. I mean, turns out the reason why he went full dictator crazy is because he needed something so bad to bring Mark back, which is so effed up. It's like, you went through all this, you killed so many people responsible for the world turning into what it is, just to draw Invincible back. But it's like, yeah, you were supposed to be back. You and I were friends at one point in time. You told me that you would come back, and you didn't. So. I lost the point I was going to make up, but I was like, right, he was heartbroken after losing Kate, even though he lost so many others. And even Samson was like, yeah, you just loved her. And he's like, yeah, it really, really hurt, you know? I've lost so many before, which I think is ironic for him to now be like, I don't even remember her because he's lost so many. It's that thing of like, it was the latest death, so it stung, but eventually live long enough, you kind of, that eats away and erodes your soul that you kind of just forget the names and faces after so long. Especially Kate was how many loved ones away, like in regards of like, you could have been, that was 100 people ago that I cared about type of thing. So if not 500, you know what I mean? So he wants Mark to kill him, which obviously Mark is kind of very much on the whole, like, I don't want to kill you thing. It is that thing of sometimes you don't have a choice. It probably is for the greater good to do it. But for Mark, once again, he's too fearful of turning into his dad. He doesn't want killing people to become so easy for him, because he's like, the moment I do, I'm no better than the rest of my species, the rest of the Viltrumites. Even though I don't like claim them as my family, they're still a part of me. That's in me. That's in my DNA, and I can't escape that. I don't want to do whatever I don't want to do anything that could help facilitate me becoming a monster like them and uncaring. So I don't even want to tempt myself by killing. That's why he's trying to get that point across to Oliver, because like the easier that becomes, the more concerned you should be that you could be that sociopath, especially knowing like, hey, there are multiple versions of me out there in the multiverse that went full slaughter and like, you know, taking control of the human race type of thing. So I think that should be considered. So he didn't want to kill Immortal, but Immortal pushed him to it. And just kind of like, you owe me, like, this is your responsibility in my suffering. And it's like, I mean, Immortal is immortal, so he could always come back. So it is kind of like a, I'll give you a half murder for that. You're at 1.5 murders, because like the Immortal could just come back, because he even said like, hey, I ripped off his head. Just as long as you keep those body parts separate, he won't come back. So it's like, it's a halfie. He's not perma-dead, but it still doesn't, you know, that for Mark is still like, no, I still murdered someone. He still looks at it and this is number 2. Hell, he even was talking to the twins when he showed up. He's like, these things aren't sentient or anything, right? He wanted to make sure they were just pure machines that he was killing. Because at least the reanimated people, it's like, at least, yeah, they might be people, but they were already dead. So it's not like he's killing a living being. So there are loopholes to it. So that's why he was like, okay, these things are just machines. Cool, I can kill them without feeling as bad. But yeah, it's like still the thing for Mark. It's like, I killed someone. This is a second person. Like, their blood is on my hand. I feel responsible, and just, yeah. He didn't want to have to do it, but he did. And even the twins say like, hey, he wanted it. But for Mark, it's like, it doesn't matter. Just shut up. It's just, it's understandable in the long run that it's just like I said, you don't even want to like tempt knocking those dominoes over, because you're like, yeah, this one gets a little easier, this gets a little easier, and by the time you get up to 5, maybe it becomes so easy that it just becomes numb. It's like, you don't, Mark is, like I said, too afraid to ever let it make him numb to death. You know, he's too afraid of that. So the Immortal had contingencies in place so that when he does in fact die, it would shut everything down, and basically the people will be able to rule again. So who knows what this future has in store for it. We'll probably never know. Who knows? These guys could always come back. That's always the interesting thing about time travel that I'm always curious about, and everything's got its own time travel rules. But we have the whole situation of, when a new timeline is created, does the old one disappear, or is it somewhere out there in the grand scheme of alternate timelines and multiverses? Because some stuff, it's like, oh, once things have changed, that timeline no longer exists. It disappears. There are other situations where, like, yeah, those timelines are always out there. They never completely disappear. You might not be able to access them, but they still exist on some shape or form. Like, the Magicians kind of allowed them to access timelines that kind of weren't there anymore, even because they reset the timeline multiple times. It's a whole thing. If you've never seen The Magicians, that's just gobbledygook to you. It doesn't mean anything. So yeah, I'm curious about it. My point being, did this timeline disappear? What about the timeline that Eve from season 2 from the future, does that timeline still exist anymore? It probably does. You just probably wouldn't be able to fully access them. So makes you wonder if there's any correlation between, well, probably not, because I was about to say Mark finally did come back, but he wasn't the same. You know, he was luckily found before he went stir crazy in the that on that planet he killed Engstrom, which I think there can be a parallel between what happened with Mark there. It's not exactly the same, but he kind of went crazy. You didn't want to see who you became, and then Immortal kind of becoming who he became in this situation. So there's parallels. But anyway, Mark, does his thing of like finishing the loop of, oh, let me get my clothes from past me and let's bounce. So he goes back, talks to Eve a little bit about everything, and he kind of wonders if he is a good person or not. Once again, it makes him question everything about himself. Like, regardless of what Immortal wanted to do, I still did it. It's like I said, there might be times when Mark has no choice, but it's still the thing of, I don't want to get comfortable too. I mean, hell, even when it came down to it with the Viltrumite fight and Thraxa, despite everything, he still couldn't bring himself to kill that lady. It took his dad, landing the final blow, because he just couldn't bring himself to cross that line. Because, if I do, I'm too predisposed in my DNA to turn into a genocidal maniac. So, once again, don't want to open that door. But Eve tries to tell him, right, whatever future that was, just like the future me wasn't me, that's not you either. As long you now have this knowledge, you can change things. So not to leave Immortal in whatever situation you might have left him in. Might be more prepared on taking more responsibility in the future. But it's the timey-wiminess of it all kind of does fuck with your head, because you're like, what did I do? Why did I make that choice? Everything that happened in that future is my responsibility, considering, yes, there was good that Immortal did, and that's something he tried to tell the twins. Yeah, he did bad, but he also did some good. He did protect his world until he turned into a megalomaniac. But it is also for Mark, it's yeah, but I'm also responsible because he did all that to get me back, because I didn't ever return for whatever reason. So, but the two of them proceed to kind of have a regular date after that, which is really sweet, and just kind of flying all over the place and get to enjoy each other's company. And it's yeah, it might be a little too soon, it might be weird for this, but I love you. And she's like, it might be weird too soon to say this too, I love you too. And it's really sweet. Always that sweet moment when you get to it. And I also appreciate the flashbacks to moments they've had throughout the series so far of very kind of pivotal, important moments for these characters, as kind of as Samantha and or Eve and Mark. So, and then they proceed to go back to his mom's house and bang it out. And I love the whole thing of his mom being like, yo, why is your door locked? Are you okay? Are you asleep? And it's yeah, we need to kind of get our own place. Because I was kind of hoping in the traditional teen comedy type of thing of your parent walking in on you having sex, and you're just oh my god, and it's well, your brother's there and your mom's there, so I'm surprised that wasn't an issue. But yeah, they were able to kind of avoid that, so that was funny. But I love that we get the return of, is it Paul F. Tompkins as the narrator. It's oh, we did this kind of literally around the same point last season. I can't remember. I want to say it was episode 3 of last season, but it might have been 4. I wish I had checked it beforehand. I looked it up. It was episode 3. But yeah, just kind of cut away again. And even though that was a whole bit last season where he cut away from Mark and Amber having sex. So I love that recurring thing. But yeah, we catch up with Alan and Nolan and kind of find out everything that's happened. And, because obviously it's been months of them in prison together. And so Alan is tried again and again, but Nolan's in his self-pity mood because he doesn't think he deserves redemption. He failed his people, he failed his family and betrayed them. So he's I have nowhere to go. I have no right to live anymore, which Alan's dude, you need to live because you could make things right with your family. You could help, but he's you're not going to. Alan over here has to survive execution upon execution. Even though none of them are successful, the prison guards keep trying to kill him. And I love that every time they do it, they end up killing themselves in the process. Everything just falls back and kills them in the process. And he's just wow, these guys are really not good at their job. But ultimately, it comes time for Nolan's execution, and Alan busts out. It's right, time for me to save my buddy. And I love that he releases so many other prisoners. I felt so bad because I'm you kind of they were like lambs to the slaughter because some of them did some damage. You're like, yeah, good on you guys. And then immediately, it seems like every single prisoner that you let out got murked. I don't know if that's everyone that was in the prison, or at the very least everyone you released got killed, which I'm like, oh, that's kind of sucky considering like you could have easily handled them, but yeah, I guess it was just too annoying, but it's still like, oh, that's effed up. So I was curious about it because I was like, well, they made a point to show Battle Beast. So I was like, he's got to be in this. So I was like, is he here? And we see the big door. I'm like, okay, there he is. So Alan releases him. He's like, oh, who releases me? And it's like, oh, like, there's some tough opponents here. He's like, Viltrumites. It's like, oh yeah, there are two of them. Well, three of them, but one of them's like a buddy, so he's kind of a no-go. But the other two you can have. It's like, oh yes. So they're wrecking shop, trying to find the execution chamber. And then I love that Battle Beast is upset. He's like, hey, how dare you trick me? The only worthy opponent I see is you. And so at the same time this is all going down, Nolan's getting the piss beat out of him as they're talking about how much of a failure he is, what made him decide to kind of become so weak. Luckily, Alan and Battle Beast got there in time. It's also interesting too because Alan doesn't know Battle Beast and Mark have history. So it's kind of like, oh yeah, like your best bud Mark got his shit pushed in by Battle Beast in season 1. Also, Nolan was there, but Battle Beast wouldn't know that. But Nolan would also be like, oh yeah, that's the guy I let beat the ever-living shit out of my son just to kind of prove a point in season 1, huh? We didn't have those conversations. It's like, that wasn't one of my shining example moments as a father. So let's kind of not talk about that, I'm sure. But I love that Battle Beast is like, yes. And then Alan's like, yeah, this guy's a big fan. He just couldn't wait to meet you guys. So they're duking it out with the Viltrumites. And ultimately, Alan is letting one of them beat the crap out of him. And I was like, well, we know he handled Anissa pretty well. I mean, it's like, to be fair, it was like one exchanging of blows. But it's still kind of like, Alan could definitely handle himself better than this. And it's like, oh, it's because, I was like, he's trying to make a point to force Nolan's hand. And it works because Nolan didn't want him to die. It's like, oh, you have come to care for other species that were considered less than. And then we find out like, oh no, like obviously you do deeply care and you stepped in to save your buddy. So they're duking it out, getting rid of the small fry at the same time. I felt bad for that one guy who Alan like smashed his head through the ship, and his head is on the outside in space, and it freezes. So Alan ends up smashing him because he's like, oh, Battle Beast can breathe in space, right? And so they're fighting out in space, and I love that whole bit with Battle Beast where it's just like he's fighting this Viltrumite and just kind of chomping away at him and fighting him. He's like, haha, because he's all about it. He's like, oh yeah, like if I end up dying here, then glory be. The fact is, I failed in battle. He's one of those character types. So, but yeah, like Alan and Nolan double teamed the other Viltrumite, and I love that situation. I was like, of course, that's so brutal. Where like they both punch him from one side, and just like squish his damn head. I was like, oh, that's metal as hell. And even Alan be like, high five. But to be fair, what we just did was kind of gross, and it feels very inappropriate to high five on. It's like, in an effed up way, you could look at it as kind of like, you guys technically fist bumped the dude to death. Both of your fists meeting his skull being like the little thin piece of meat in between, grossly enough. So, but Alan has to tell, Nolan, it's like, right, you have to, I knew you'd come through, because he's like, yeah, you say you wouldn't help or whatever, but it's like, yeah, you did. And it's like, you would if it was Debbie or Mark or that purple kid you told me about, or in case me, because you saved me, because like, yeah, we've been prison cellmates for a while, and we're actually friends now, which I'm like, would have never expected this situation to be what it is. So Nolan is kind of willing to live now. Now, whether, it's like, right, I get it, you're not going to fight your people. It'd be kind of cool if you helped us, but at the end of the day, I understand you don't want to. You betrayed your people, and you don't want to go down further that route. I get it, but hey, you still helped me in the long run. So beyond this, what does Nolan plan? He can't really go back to Earth because he knows like what's waiting for him, and it's like, especially now that Debbie's kind of moved on. Even last season, once again, the whole line of, oh, I think I miss my wife. You have no business saying that, but it's like, yeah, you're your redemption arc, but we're not there to you going back to Debbie forgiving you. Mark is in a very complicated space. He's a lot more willing to forgive you than anyone. Oliver will show you love regardless, because he doesn't see you for the monster you were. He's going to know the redeemed you going forward. And that's going to be interesting considering where Oliver is post last episode and where Nolan is. So that's going to be an interesting thing and element. When you have that whole custody situation is going to be interesting if we get to that point. Unlike, the values that Nolan has now, that he is a better person, but it's like, well, what are you going to do? What is Paul going to do if Nolan pops? I mean, I'm so curious to see where that storyline goes, because it's like, you can't just like pop back into their lives and make sure everything's okay, especially that she's moved on without you and she's in a better place. She's with someone she can be happy with and not have to live with the fact that you're a monster who massacred so many people who viewed her as a pet. That's the last thing she ever heard from Nolan. So there's all of that, right? Either way, we did get some really interesting information because Alan's like, well, we need to get out of here before they call for backup. I'm sure the Viltrumites call for people, but Nolan's like, they're not coming, because he reveals the fact is there's only like less than 50 Viltrumites left because of the whole like pure-blooded Viltrumites, meaning like there might be some like spread out seed out there like Mark and Oliver, but pure-blooded Viltrumites all about the hurrah Viltrumite, because we don't know if Thaddeus, we don't know if he has any kids or not. Probably not, but I mean, we don't know, like, how many kids he might have spread around, like very much in an ego MCU route. I'm talking about MCU specifically because I don't know Ego from the comics. I don't know how much of Ego in the Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 is very much like how he was in the comics or not. But it's interesting because we know, as Nolan had explained to Mark in season 1, that there was a culling. Only the strongest of the strongest survived, because they cut their species in half. So either, hey, the Viltrumites were never that many to begin with. But to be fair, that was like years and years ago, because even Nolan said by the time he came into the fold, the Viltrumite army had already become like the strongest and not the only army in the universe. So that's probably like maybe hundreds, that could have been centuries or millennia before Nolan might have been born or whatever. Because we don't really know how. I mean, it seems like I was about to say we don't know how they replicate. It's like, well, they replicate just like, it seems like just normally through sex. I don't think they're artificially created, just like Alan was. Like, I don't think it's a similar. I think it's just a regular traditional human birthing, similar to the human birthing process. So that must mean that wasn't the only culling that they had. Like, over the years, they had more and more. Because I'm sure the whole, I'm more Viltrumite than you. Like, I'm 95% versus you, who is, I'm 100%, you are 99 or 98%. It might have come down to that type of situation. And because they don't believe in spreading their seed with other species, because it could be a thing of they did like spread their seed to other species. It might be kind of like a Genghis Khan situation where, like, because he raped and pillaged so much, like so much of his that DNA is still alive and spread around, that it could be something like that for the Viltrumites. But like, they might have been like, we can't have any impurities out there, because they probably testing to see like, all right, how much, like, if we do breed with another species, because that's probably their only means of keeping their people alive. And that's why the whole purebred thing, because they've hunted down everyone else that wasn't. Because I'm sure there's those who kind of let that stuff slide, and there's others who are like, no, we have to keep the purity, because that's the only way, that this is the only way and means in which the Viltrumite should continue. So it also makes you wonder, is like, well, that's probably led to a lot of inbreeding, hasn't it? Maybe not. But it's like, yeah, like, not, because that might also be like, maybe they got to the point that they had to start going down the artificial route, and some of those had to get got. Who knows? I'm probably way overthinking this, but I mean, it is something. It's a really interesting thought experiment, or just thoughts to have about like what that means in a grand scheme of things, and how their species got to the point that they are kind of a endangered species in a lot of ways, which is ironic considering, like, hey, this like sweeping genocidal species, there's not actually that many of them, which Nolan's like, because of that, because there's not that many of them, it means it's that plausible to wipe them out. That's the Viltrum's deep, dirty secret that they don't want out there, because knowing that there's that few of them would make people more likely to unite against him. To be fair, as we've seen, one Viltrumite is enough to conquer an entire planet, so it still doesn't change the fact that these motherfuckers are beefy and scary as hell, but, it still makes it a little more like you can see the light at the end of the tunnel, so... It's like I said, some very, very interesting developments all across the board. I'm very, very excited to see where the next episode ends up taking us going forward with all of this. But really, that's all I wanted to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.